All right. This is an update to a presentation that I did before the.
Mr. Leon-Guerrero, I don't see it. Does anybody else see it?
Yes.
I see it.
You see it?
It's a political cartoon from Pacific Daily News.
Oh, there it is. Okay, there I have it.
Okay, this is an update to a presentation I did before the Guam Economic Development Authority after they approved a contract with GRP. So in the way of background, the reason why I approached the board here is because we've been seeing a lot of talk in the media about waste energy from politicians, and they've all been going on about a contract that's waiting at Adelup to sign. And if Governor Leon-Guerrero doesn't sign it, they will sign it as soon as they get in. And they're talking basically about a $180 million project. I've been on the opposite side representing the community here since 2007. And since 2007, this project has grown from 70 million now to, listening to Dave talk to the Mayor's Council, between 200 and 220 million. Anytime we're talking about that level of public funding, we need to proceed very carefully and make sure all of our ducks are in a line. And towards that end, when I was preparing for my presentation to the Guam Economic Development Authority, I did a FOIA, got every single document they had in their possession. It came to 2,285 pages. So the information I'm sharing with you is based in part on documentation that comes directly from GRRP and GITA regarding this project. And what's real interesting is that in this 2,000 pages of documents, I didn't see any documents with public Department of Public Works or GPA included. Almost 90% of the documents that I have are between the governor's office, Guam Economic Development Authority, several attorneys' offices, and a couple of different companies. So to begin with, the original waste energy contract died on its own terms. So in 1982, the contract suffered a license death because even Guam Economic Development Authority in reviewed the 1982 contract and noted, as circled there, with regard to the license agreement, GITA rejects your assertion that it continues to be valid and in full force and effect. The basis for GITA's position is that the extensions of licenses set forth in Section 2 of the agreement failed to occur because IEEI failed to make substantial progress towards the purposes of achieving the equipment. Also, IEEI never made any payments on the $250,000 loan they got from GITA. And this is another reason the contract was killed. However, even assuming the license had been extended and is in force, IEE has repudiated the contract by its unequivocal statements that it cannot substantially perform the essential terms of the license agreement. And then after this contract was signed to operate the waste energy plant, there was a 1-year license. So it wasn't a blanket license. It was issued and they had 1 year to perform. At the end of 1 year, there would be an extension offered for a second year. There never was an extension offered. And had there been an extension offered, it only would have been for 1 year. And if there had been substantial progress in the second year, they would have been given a third year. So 3 1-year extensions. And then at the end of 3 years, had they moved forward, they would have had a 20-year license. But they never got a single extension because from 19 1982 until 1989, there was no activity, no documentation whatsoever on this agreement. So there's no documents that the contractor performed any of the work the contract required. There's no record of payments made towards the $250,000 loan that GITA gave them to fund the development work. Had they done all the requirements as listed in the term, they would have used this agreement to mean that the 1-year term, unless the agreement has been extended as specified above, in the event it shall mean this was the entire period of the extension. So in other words, unless there are written extensions, this 1 year was all they had. So what we're saying here is that the very minimum they were supposed to do is within 60 days, submit a schedule of what would constitute substantial progress, and they never did that. So now we see in 1988 and that GITA, through its legal counsel, begins to foreclose, and here's an ad in the Pacific Daily News announcing a summons has been issued for the purposes of terminating the contract. And here is the letter to Waggy Gurgis, because in 1989, out of the blue, the attorneys get a letter from an attorney in Hawaii offering to assume the entire loan and take over the contract. But at this point, it's already in default. And here was the amended license agreement that they keep talking about. When I say they, GRP keeps referring to an amended license agreement that they got from GITA. Now, this follows the fruit of the poisonous tree doctrine. Once you do something wrong, everything you do after that is wrong in a legal point of view. And the fact that IEEI failed to meet any of the contract requirements killed that license. So at that point in time, GITA had no license that they could amend, especially when you consider they had already gone to court and issued letters to, this is the letter that GITA received from GRP's attorney, requesting permission to take over the contract and that we will take over the debt. So that was the bait to get the GITA board or the GITA management at the time to say, hey, here's a chance that we can recover some of our money. Then in 2003, the Guam Supreme Court voided the contract as a result of the lawsuits from the late Senator Pangilinan and other residents of the area. And here we see in there, the 1996 agreement is null and void as a violation of Title 48. So that's what they keep talking about, this Supreme Court voided the contract. The Supreme Court didn't say, oh, the contract is fine. All you have to do is just take this one little section out. No, they said the agreement is null and void. So then we had the federal receivership come in. And once again, the federal GRP tried to get involved in the landfill operations through the receivership. And the receivership notified GRP that the purpose of this letter is to reiterate provisions of the March 17, 2008 order, the district court placing solid waste in receivership and best the authority for performance of existing contracts and entering into future contracts deemed necessary with the receiver. So at that point in time, GRP tried to get involved in the landfill operation, and they were advised by GBB that we were advised by the Attorney General of Guam that the reference licensed agreement is invalid since it was executed without a public bid, and we were also advised by the Attorney General's office the license agreement had expired by its own terms. That goes back to the earlier part of the documentation. We just had an earthquake here in Santa Rita. Okay. All right, back on track. The Attorney General's office informed them the license agreement expired by its own terms. So then we have GRP filing a claim against the government of Guam, and the Attorney General's office says the ban remains in effect. The mediation failed, the license expired, was unenforceable, and no revised contract had been negotiated between the parties since the Supreme Court invalidated the contract. Which brings us to continued efforts by GRP to get around this by pretending as if they still had a contract in place, and they went before the Guam Environmental Protection Agency, which issued them a denial. And GRP then filed a lawsuit against government of Guam because here in the EPA's denial of the waste permit, they noticed that there is no contract. So the company then tried, since they failed at the GETA level, they failed at the Supreme Court level, they failed at the federal receiver level, they failed at GEPA level, they had Senator Tina Muñoz Barnes introduce a bill authorizing a waste energy plant on Chamorro Land Trust land, and that GRP would be the sole licensee of that waste energy plant. Well, in 4 days, we got 2,500 signatures of residents, primarily in Santa Rita, Agate, Jonia, Inarajan, and the rest of the island. And the bill failed, showing that there is widespread opposition to this plant, this contract. So in 2015, GETA signed an agreement with GRRP, and it had a lot of weird conditions to it. But then I did my presentation, which was a little more different than the one you're seeing here today, because it was all around the governor signing a deal to build an incinerator at a time an incinerator is illegal, at a time when the landfill was under control of the receiver and government of Guam had no authority to sign a waste to energy contract or anything involving solid waste. The board thought about that, and they did a pause on the action. Now, what the board actually did, I wish they'd gone through with, was they rescinded their motion to authorize the governor to sign the contract, and they passed a new motion authorizing a $50,000 expenditure to a waste energy subject matter expert to determine whether or not waste energy was technically viable and economically viable for Guam. And for the next 6 months, I called GETA asking if the RFP had been released, who requested it, and I was told month after month that there was no RFP. And finally, they told me, well, the reason we're not issuing an RFP is our attorney said that we can't spend government money investigating an illegal activity. I differ with that. I don't think there's any problem with spending government funds to determine whether or not the technology is there and it makes economic sense, so that we could use that as the basis for moving forward. And I'll make those recommendations later. Anyway, GETA, after that presentation and a talk with their attorney, they went ahead and axed the feasibility study. Now, earlier, Dave Sablon, and bear in mind, we are friends and agree on everything except for this. But here we are, when he was talking to you guys, he implied that there was a lawsuit in place, and all we had to do to make that $20 million lawsuit go away was to have the governor sign the contract to begin work on a waste energy plant. Well, in 2021, the lawsuit was terminated with prejudice because GRP failed to prosecute their own filing. And that's the $20 million that GRP sold. Now, here's the basis of their lawsuit. They sued government of Guam for not entering into negotiations to create a new contract that was illegal and under the control of the receiver. And that was the basis of their lawsuit. Court dismissed it, and here we are today. Waste to energy is a numbers game. You guys, I'm just preaching to the choir at this point, I know, but I feel we need to go through it. GRP maintains to this day, and I don't know where they get the information, that Guam is generating 725 tons a day of solid waste. That puts us in the league with Escambia, Florida, which has 305,000 residents, generates 700 tons. Madison County, Alabama, which has 340,000 residents, and Monterey, California, which has 428,000 residents. But somehow our people are so much more efficient at generating municipal solid waste that we do it better than anybody else. And my contention is that if we were only taking between 200 and 300 tons a day at the scales, then, and Dave says everybody's burning it in the jungles. Well, Guam would look like California on a bad fire day if we had 425 tons a day of trash being burned in the jungle. So we can say that that's not real. Here was, at the time we did the presentation, we were looking at the waste stream coming in from all sorts, and it came into around 200 tons a day pre-restriction and 193 tons a day after the restrictions got in on construction debris and tires and a few other items. So we're nowhere near the 600 to 700 tons a day that make this minimally possible. So going back to the numbers game, he talked about Japan. Japan has waste energy plants all over the place, and they do. Everywhere they have a waste energy plant, it has a service area that is a minimum of 2.5 million residents. We do not have 2.5 million residents in our area. He also maintained that waste energy will lower tipping fees. It'll lower it so much that we'll be buying trash from people. Well, in Dauphin County, which is the seat for the capital of the state of Pennsylvania, Harrisburg population and Dauphin County have a population of 268,000 people. Their tipping fees with a waste energy plant are $190 a ton, and this is back in 2015. I don't know what it is now. I haven't updated the numbers, but in 2015, when I made this presentation to Gita, it was $190 a ton. The surrounding counties, the 5 surrounding counties, the tipping fee was $80 a ton. So the fact that waste to energy is not going to reduce the tipping fees. In fact, Harrisburg, Pennsylvania had to file for bankruptcy because the cost of maintaining the facility were so large that it drove the city. I think they were by the time they filed for bankruptcy, they were close to $200 million in debt on the maintenance requirements and upgrades to meet EPA standards. At the same time we were doing this, GBB, who we are all familiar with, was involved in another city evaluating waste energy, Cleveland. Cuyahoga County, Ohio, was looking at a waste energy project. Population of the county is 1.4 million, and they generate 3,900 tons of trash per day back in 2015. Now, granted, they have a lot of manufacturing and distribution facilities in the area, and so that's part of the reason why their tonnage is so high. But then again, they do have 1.4 million. The county commissioners spent $1.7 million evaluating 50 proposals from 25 companies. each company was asked to do two proposals, a low-end proposal and a high-end proposal. They spent 1.7 million having subject matter experts. And here's the requirements. To submit, whoever submitted a proposal had to either designed, built, or operated a waste energy plant that has been in operation for a period of 60 months or more prior to submission, so that they could have a verifiable track record. At the end of 2 years, here's just some of the companies that submitted, and we see our friends GBB also submitted proposals. So they know a thing or two about waste energy, obviously, because the only way they could be on this list is if they had designed, built, or operated a waste energy plant. I met with Harvey and talked with him about waste energy, and he shared with me some of his experiences working with waste energy plants. So I was glad to see them on this list. At the end of the 2 years of doing the analysis, the Cuyahoga County Commissioners decided that waste energy was not affordable for them. Honolulu has a waste energy plant. It burns 2,000 tons a day, 92% of the trash that's on the island. I will give them that much. But because of the cost of maintenance and operations, there's a penalty. And as of 2016, the city had paid $6.2 million over 3 years in penalties for not meeting the trash requirements. And they got a force majeure in place now because of COVID, the shutdown of the tourism industry, and the waste stream fell off the cliff. And so that's the only reason Honolulu isn't paying millions of dollars a year in penalties like they had been in the past. Now think about that. At 2,000 tons a day, 92% of the waste stream, Honolulu still wasn't delivering enough trash to generate enough electricity to offset the maintenance and operation cost of the plant. At the same time we were looking at this, Hilo, Hawaii, with 186,000 people, was looking at a waste energy plant at the same time that we were. And they were looking at a $125 million plant. And at the end of the day, even though they have the highest priced electricity in the nation, and they already generate about 20% of their energy from biomass, burning sugarcane and waste product, agri waste, they still could not afford it. Now, Puerto Rico took a different turn. In 2015, Puerto Rico was looking at $800 million to build a waste energy plant. And now they're looking at going to modular nuclear, because why spend $871 million to build a waste energy plant when for $1 billion you can get a small nuclear power plant that has recently been approved and is partially funded by the Department of Energy as a pilot project. So that's where Puerto Rico